They say in the endless expanse of the galaxy, fear is a currency more powerful than any weapon. Civilizations rise and fall not only because of the armies they command, but because of the reputations they earn. Some species are feared for their technological advancements, others for their biological superiority, and others still for the sheer scale of their empires. But when whispers echo through the void about humans, the fear takes on a different shape. It is not the fear of overwhelming numbers. It is not the fear of genetic perfection. It is not even the fear of technological dominance. It is something far deeper, far more unsettling. The recognition that humans are a contradiction the galaxy cannot predict, cannot control, and cannot fully understand. Aliens did not fear us at first. To them, humanity seemed fragile, almost laughably so. Our bodies were not encased in hardened scales, nor wrapped in protective exoskeletons. We lacked venom, claws, or natural weapons. Our lifespan was pitiful compared to the centuries some species enjoyed. Even our homeworld appeared unstable. Storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, predators lurking in every shadow. To them, we were a primitive, unlucky species, barely surviving on a hostile rock orbiting an average star. And yet, despite all of that, we endured. The first time the Galactic Council observed humanity, they recorded notes with cold, clinical detachment. Bipedal primates, limited strength, primitive emotional drives, aggressive tendencies, not considered a major threat. That assessment was repeated across countless reports. To most alien eyes, humans were destined to remain small, insignificant, contained to their one little world. What they never considered was that fragility breeds resilience, weakness forges adaptability, and the inability to control one's environment leads to a relentless drive to master it. That was the first mistake, because when the galaxy finally crossed paths with humans outside their cradle, they began to see flashes of something unnatural. Other species had faced adversity and adapted. Other species had survived wars, plagues, or disasters. But none had embraced struggle the way humans did. To most civilizations, war was a tragedy to be avoided at all costs. To humans, war was hell, but one they would enter willingly if the alternative was submission. Where other species would flee from overwhelming odds, humans had a disturbing tendency to stand, fight, and keep fighting long after any rational calculation said they should be dead. This was not courage in the way aliens understood it. This was something more frightening. Imagine, if you will, a world where defeat means annihilation. Most species crumble under that kind of pressure. But humans seem to awaken when backed into a corner. There is a phrase in your languages, desperation breeds innovation. To an alien, that is not just a phrase, it is a nightmare. For in every desperate moment where humanity should have collapsed, they did the impossible instead. The Zarthul learned this the hard way. They were a reptilian species, proud, disciplined, and militarily superior by every measurable standard. When they encountered humans during their expansion campaigns, they believed the war would be short, decisive, and brutal. In the opening months, it was exactly that. Human fleets burned, colonies fell, millions died. Any other species would have surrendered under such relentless assault. But humans did not. They fought back, reorganized, adapted their strategies. They learned from every defeat. Every time the Zarthul believed they had broken humanity's spirit, they discovered new weapons, new tactics, and new forms of resistance. And then came the moment that still haunts the Council's archives, the Battle of Kepler, 442b. The humans had lost half their fleet. Their supply lines were fractured. Civilians were dying by the millions. But instead of retreating, instead of begging for peace, the humans turned their own colonies into weapons. They detonated orbital stations, sacrificing entire populations to destroy enemy warships. They burned their own fields so the invaders would starve. They used every scrap of metal, every ounce of fuel, every last breath of their people to inflict maximum pain. The Zafu won battles, but in winning, they lost something more important: their will. They withdrew, not because they could not conquer humans, but because they realized humans would rather destroy themselves and everything around them than allow themselves to be ruled. That revelation spread across the galaxy like a plague. Fear was born. What the galaxy fears most about humans is not their weapons. It is not their technology. It is not even their numbers. It is that humans refuse to accept limits. They are irrational in ways that make sense only to themselves. Where another species calculates odds and chooses survival, humans gamble everything. They throw themselves into the abyss, believing they will climb out of it, and disturbingly often they do. You cannot negotiate with that kind of will. You cannot deter it. You cannot break it. The stories spread in hushed whispers across alien starports and council halls. A human soldier pinned beneath rubble, burning alive, still firing at the enemy until his weapon melted. A human crew venting half their ship into the vacuum of space just to keep fighting with the other half. A mother on a backwater colony standing in front of armored alien soldiers with nothing but a kitchen knife, buying her children enough time to escape. These stories are not just tales, they are warnings. Aliens began to ask questions they did not want the answers to. What kind of species creates myths not of gods protecting them, but of mortals defying gods and winning? What kind of minds invent stories where death is not the end, but a challenge to overcome? What kind of people write songs about their own destruction and call them anthems? The galaxy looked at humans and realized they were staring at something alien to them. Not in body, but in spirit. Something that should not exist by the rules of survival, yet did. That is why humans are feared. Because where other species are predictable, humans are chaos wrapped in flesh. They cannot be categorized, cannot be modeled, cannot be relied upon to act as expected. The only constant with humanity is defiance. And defiance, in the cold calculus of the galaxy, is the most dangerous weapon imaginable. So when the question is asked, why are humans feared more than any alien species? The answer is simple. It is because humans do not stop. Not when they should. Not when they must. Not even when it kills them. And in that endless refusal to surrender, they terrify an entire galaxy.
Years, documenting wars, treaties, collapses, and the rise of empires. In those vast libraries of knowledge, every species is categorized, analyzed, and studied to prevent future mistakes. But the section on humans is different. It is not neat. It is not orderly. It is filled with contradictions, reports that conflict, and testimonies that sound more like nightmares than official documents. The first entry about humanity reads like a child's observation. They are small, fragile, unremarkable. That was the judgment of the first survey ship that glimpsed Earth from afar. No advanced energy signatures, no signs of interstellar travel, no planetary unification. Just billions of small creatures endlessly fighting among themselves. The observers concluded humanity would remain isolated, perhaps eventually destroy themselves. That was the expectation. And then, barely a blink later in galactic terms, humans leapt into the void. They did not crawl. They did not take careful steps. They jumped. Their species barely had centuries of peace behind them before they strapped themselves to rockets and hurled their fragile bodies into space. Aliens could not comprehend this. Why would a species so divided, so violent, so chaotic, waste resources on exploration instead of survival? The answer became clear. Survival was exploration for humans. They could not stop themselves from pushing beyond boundaries. They had evolved on a dangerous world where staying still meant death. Every storm, every predator, every famine had taught them that progress was the only defense. To sit idle was to perish. And so, they did what humans always do when faced with impossible odds. They pressed forward. That pressing forward is what made them dangerous. One alien researcher wrote, "Humans possess no natural armor, yet they build armor stronger than any carapace. They lack wings, yet they have filled their skies with machines. They cannot breathe water, yet they traverse the oceans with vessels of steel. Every limitation they face, they do not accept, they break it." This philosophy unsettled the galaxy. Other species evolved to exist within their constraints. The amphibious Thauru did not dream of fire because their world was covered in water. The mountainous Igora never sought flight because they were born with it. The insectoid krill never imagined tools beyond their own claws. But humans looked at their limitations and saw them as challenges. Every weakness became a puzzle to solve. Every barrier became an invitation to push harder. It was this mindset that turned them into a galactic nightmare. The Council's fear was not only about human war, it was about their psychology. Imagine a species that laughs in the face of death, not because they do not understand it, but because they know it intimately. From their earliest days, death has been humanity's closest companion. Starvation, disease, predators, warfare, natural disasters. Their history is written in graves. And yet, instead of hiding from it, they learned to walk beside it. They told stories of underworlds, of afterlives, of ghosts and rebirths. They built philosophies that said death is not an end, but a transition. What does that mean to other species? Terror. Because in battle, where most armies fear loss above all, humans fight with a grim acceptance. A human soldier does not collapse at the sight of certain death. They become more dangerous. They fight harder, as if death itself is fuel. The psychological weight of this is devastating. One alien commander wrote after facing humans, "It is like fighting shadows that do not care whether they survive. For every one we kill, 2 more rise. They grin with blood on their teeth. They sing as their ships burn." How do you fight such madness? But the galaxy eventually realized something worse. This was not madness. It was strategy. During the Siege of Lighton, the Vraker expected a swift victory. They targeted the human civilian population first, assuming it would break morale. Instead, the opposite happened. Civilians who had never held weapons turned into resistance fighters. Farmers became saboteurs. Children carried messages between bunkers. Families dug tunnels beneath the cities to move supplies. Instead of collapsing, human society hardened into an unbreakable core. What should have been a weakness, their emotions, their families, their bonds became weapons. The Vraker withdrew after sustaining losses their war planners could not explain. They described it in their reports. Human stubbornness is not an individual trait. It spreads like a virus. You kill one, and 10 rise, not because of orders, but because of love, because of anger, because of memory. They weaponize their grief. They turn every loss into fuel. That realization spread fear faster than any fleet dot, because to fight humans was to risk awakening, something no other species possessed. A collective rage that burns brighter the more you try to extinguish it. In council chambers, debates raged. Should humanity be allowed to expand? Should they be contained? Could they even be contained? Each argument ended with the same uneasy silence, because the truth gnawed at them. Humanity could not be controlled by conventional means. Not through war, not through diplomacy, not through assimilation. Fear turned into paranoia. Reports began circulating that humans were reckless, even in peace. They colonized worlds others deemed uninhabitable. Where toxic storms raged, humans built domes. Where gravity crushed weaker bodies, humans adapted with exosuits. Where freezing wastelands stretched endless, humans lit fires and thrived. It seemed there was no world too harsh, no environment too hostile. Alien biologists marveled at it, but politicians trembled. If humans could survive anywhere, and nowhere was safe from them, and if nowhere was safe, then every empire would one day find itself facing them. That is why whispers of banning humans began long before official declarations. The galaxy did not want to admit it openly, but the fear was spreading like wildfire. Not fear of their weapons, not fear of their numbers, but fear of their refusal to die quietly. Fear of the stories that made no sense. Like a human crew stranded on a dead planet surviving by eating their own boots boiled in water until rescue arrived. Or a pilot ejecting into vacuum, patching their suit with their own frozen blood, and living long enough to transmit enemy fleet positions. Each story added another layer to the legend. Each act of defiance became another nail in the coffin of galactic certainty. Other species followed rules, patterns, logic. Humans broke them, rewrote them, and sometimes ignored them entirely. And when logic said they should not have survived, they did anyway. That is why humans are feared more than any alien species. Because in every archive, in every battle report, in every whispered rumor, the conclusion is always the same. If humans are pushed to the brink, they will not fall. They will climb back, bloodied and broken, and drag their enemies down with them if they must. Fear is not about what humanity has done. Fear is about what they will do when cornered next. The galaxy has always prided itself on logic. Empires rise and fall with the belief that war can be calculated, that outcomes can be predicted, that numbers and probabilities dictate survival. But when humans entered the stars, they shattered that belief. They became the variable no strategist could plan for, the anomaly that ruined every equation. The Zar Thul called it the human factor. The Vrokor called it chaos flesh. The Agora simply called it the nightmare. Every alien culture has its own name for it, but the meaning is the same. When humans are involved, no prediction holds, no certainty remains. The Council tried to understand it. They studied every war humanity fought, every battle that defied reason. And what they discovered only deepened their unease. Take the infamous War of the Tides. The Falru, an amphibious empire, attacked human colonies on ocean worlds, believing their natural biology gave them superiority. They struck with devastating precision, sinking human settlements beneath endless waves. But the humans did not surrender. They built floating fortresses from wreckage. They adapted submarines into war machines. Divers in patched suits fought with harpoons against armored soldiers. A council expected their extinction in months. Instead, the war dragged on for years, until the Falru abandoned the campaign entirely. The council's record described the humans with a single chilling phrase: they refused to drown. Then there was the siege of Vega Station, perhaps the most studied example of human resilience. A fleet of alien warships surrounded the outpost, cutting off all supply lines. Thousands of civilians were trapped inside. The enemy's calculation was simple: starve them, break their morale, and claim the station without wasting firepower. By every logical measure, it should have worked. Yet months passed, and the humans still resisted. When investigators pieced together what had happened later, they were horrified. The station's inhabitants had rationed their food with ruthless efficiency. They had converted hydroponic gardens into makeshift farms. They had burned furniture for heat, melted wiring for scrap, and even eaten fungus that grew in dark corners of the air vents. And through all of it, they fought back. They launched raids on enemy ships, stealing supplies. They sabotaged blockades with jury-rigged drones. They turned survival into warfare. The siege ended not because the humans starved, but because their enemies did. Unable to match the humans' relentless tactics, the alien fleet retreated in exhaustion. One alien officer later testified, "We were not fighting soldiers. We were fighting hunger itself. And hunger does not surrender." But perhaps the most terrifying account came from the krill, an insectoid species known for their hive unity and collective logic. They clashed with humans in a conflict over mining rights on the asteroid belts of Sigma Draconis. The krill outnumbered humans 10 to 1, with superior weapons and armor. Yet the battle devolved into chaos. The humans fought with no discernible pattern, no strategy the krill could adapt to. They attacked from angles that made no sense, sacrificed units to achieve objectives that seemed impossible, and used their own losses as bait to lure the enemy into traps. The krill were shaken not by the brutality of the conflict, but by its unpredictability. Every drone we lost weakened us. Every human they lost made them stronger. We do not understand this creature. That was the krill commander's report, written before they abandoned the war entirely. The council began to whisper among themselves. Humans were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were gamblers, willing to stake everything on a single roll of the dice, even if the odds were impossible. And worse, they often won. That gambler's instinct terrifies the galaxy. Because war, to most species, is about minimizing risk. To humans, war is about embracing it, about using risk as a weapon. They take chances no one else would. They make moves no one else dares. And they force their enemies into positions where even victory tastes like defeat. One alien scholar wrote, a report that was quickly classified, "Humans do not seek safety. They seek meaning. To them, suffering without purpose is intolerable. But if suffering leads to a chance at victory, they embrace it with open arms. They have transformed pain into a tool, death into a motivator, and despair into fire. This is why they cannot be conquered. This is why they terrify us." And then, as if the wars were not proof enough, came the stories, the testimonies that no one could explain, but no one could deny. Stories that turned humans from a species into a legend. A pilot whose ship was disabled in deep space, surviving for weeks by drinking recycled coolant and writing warnings in his own blood on the hull until a rescue ship found him. A unit of soldiers cut off behind enemy lines who dug into the ground and lived in tunnels for months, emerging only at night to raid supply depots until their enemies abandoned the territory entirely. A child who walked through a battlefield, carrying her baby brother, covered in ash and burns, refusing to cry until she reached safety. These stories spread faster than fleets. They reached the outer edges of the galaxy, where species who had never even seen a human began to fear them. Because stories, unlike battles, cannot be contained. They live on, whispered, exaggerated, and believed. And so the council faced a dilemma. If they admitted their fear openly, they would look weak. If they ignored it, they risked more wars ending in humiliation. In secret meetings, they debated endlessly. Some argued humans should be banned from expansion. Others argued they should be exterminated before they grew too powerful. But even those who spoke of extermination did so with trembling voices. Because how do you kill something that does not fear death? The galaxy had faced predators, conquerors, and destroyers before. But humans were something else entirely. They were not the strongest, nor the fastest, nor the smartest. But they were the only species that refused to break. And in that refusal, they carried a shadow larger than any empire. This is why, when aliens gather in hidden corners of their fleets and stations, they whisper one truth. If you meet a human on the battlefield, pray, not for victory, for survival. Fear is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers behind closed doors, in smoke-filled chambers where the most powerful beings in the galaxy gather to decide the fate of entire species. And in those chambers, there was one subject that returned again and again, no matter how many times the council tried to bury it. Humanity got it first, the meetings were subtle. Officials did not dare speak the word directly. They called it the anomaly, the chaos factor, or even the contagion. But everyone in the chamber knew exactly what they meant. It was not about a single battle or war anymore. It was about survival. Not of humans, but of everyone else. The Council's paranoia grew with each passing year. Reports streamed in from the frontier. Human colonies thriving where no other species could survive. Mining stations built on asteroids deemed too unstable. Settlements in frozen wastelands or scorching deserts where the Council had said life was impossible. And with every report, the whispers grew darker. They are expanding too fast. They thrive on hardship. We cannot compete with that. If they are not stopped now, they will spread everywhere. The fear turned political. Empires that had once been rivals found themselves united under a single thought: contain humanity at all costs. But containment was easier spoken than done. The first attempt came in the form of economic restrictions. The Council voted to cut off trade with human colonies, believing that isolation would weaken them. But instead of collapse, the opposite happened. Humans adapted, creating self-sustaining systems. They built industries out of scraps, invented technologies from salvage, and turned their scarcity into strength. One alien observer noted bitterly, "We tried to starve them, and instead, we taught them how to feast on nothing." The second attempt was diplomatic. The Council spread propaganda across the galaxy, painting humans as unstable, violent, and untrustworthy. They showed images of wars, of human soldiers laughing on battlefields, of survivors pulling themselves from rubble with bloodied smiles. The goal was simple: make humans pariahs. But again, the plan failed. Instead of fear, the propaganda sparked something unexpected: curiosity. Other species, especially the younger ones who had grown restless under the Council's rigid order, began to wonder, what makes humans so different? What makes them unbreakable? Soon, explorers and mercenaries sought out humans not to avoid them, but to learn from them, to fight beside them, to see if the stories were true. By the time the Council realized their mistake, human mercenaries were fighting in alien wars. Human doctors were saving lives on alien worlds. And human storytellers were filling cantinas with tales that spread like wildfire. The galaxy had not rejected humanity. It had become addicted to them. Desperation drove the Council to its darkest plan yet. In a hidden chamber beneath the star system of Keller Prime, the most powerful leaders met in secret. No records of the meeting exist in official archives. But fragments leaked, carried by spies and traitors, pieced together like shards of broken glass. The plan was called Project Silence. Its goal: orchestrate humanity's downfall without ever admitting the Council's hand. Assassinations, sabotage, plagues engineered in laboratories, silent weapons for a species that could not be broken in open war. The Council feared humans, yes, but more than that, they feared being seen as afraid. They wanted humanity erased quietly, like a dangerous rumor. But once again, the plan unraveled in ways they did not expect. The assassinations failed, often turned back upon their originators. Sabotage attempts were met with counterattacks that revealed the Council's own spies. And the plagues? The plagues that were meant to wipe out colonies only made humanity stronger. Immune systems adapted. Communities rallied. Where entire cities of other species would have perished, humans endured, scarred but alive. One human scientist, when later asked how they had survived a virus engineered to erase them, simply laughed. "We've been fighting death since we were crawling in the mud. You think some lab trick is going to scare us?" Every attempt at control only confirmed what the Council feared most. Humanity could not be contained. And so, the whispers turned to panic. Some factions demanded immediate war, arguing that humanity must be destroyed before it was too late. But others recoiled in horror, reminding the chamber of what war with humans meant. Every empire that had tried had been humbled. Entire fleets had been lost, generals disgraced, worlds abandoned. The debates grew vicious. Empires threatened to leave the council. Assassinations began, not against humans this time, but against each other. The question of humanity fractured the galaxy more deeply than any war had before dot in the midst of this chaos. Something extraordinary happened. A young alien ambassador from the Althari species stood before the council and said what no one else dared. You fear humans because you do not understand them. You see their scars and call them monsters. But have you ever asked yourselves, what scars did they earn those from? Why do they laugh on the battlefield? Why do they not fear death? It is not because they are monsters. It is because they are survivors. The chamber fell silent. No one wanted to hear it. No one wanted to believe that the very traits that terrified them might also be what made humanity admirable. But in the silence, something shifted. Not all species agreed. Some continued to call for extermination. Others began to question the council itself. Why should humanity be judged for surviving? Why should the galaxy fear them instead of learning from them? The truth was spreading, despite the council's efforts. And the more it spread, the harder it became to contain. For every alien who saw humanity as a threat, there was another who saw them as a spark of hope. A reminder that survival was not about perfection or control, but about sheer, stubborn refusal to give up. The council, in its arrogance, had tried to bury humanity's reputation. Instead, they had turned it into legend. And legends are far more dangerous than armies. There comes a point when fear is no longer about what you see in front of you, but what you imagine when the lights go out. That is where humanity now lived in the minds of the galaxy, not as soldiers or settlers or diplomats, but as shadows that could not be erased. The council wanted control, but what they created instead was a myth. And myths, once born, are impossible to kill. It began small. Stories whispered in cantinas, on cargo freighters, in mining colonies cut off from central authority. A mercenary told of a human who fought blind after being struck in the eyes, still taking down his enemy with nothing but instinct. A doctor shared the tale of a human who refused anesthetic during surgery, joking with the medical team as their chest was cut open. A trader swore he saw a human woman carry 2 companions through toxic storms for days, her skin blistered and raw, refusing to stop until they were safe. Each story was real, or at least real enough. But every retelling sharpened the edges, made the details sharper, the humans larger than life. The galaxy did not just know of humans. They began to believe in them. And belief is the most dangerous weapon of all. Soon, entire alien battalions fought harder simply because a single human fought beside them. Colonies held out against sieges because they remembered stories of human endurance. Children from species with long traditions of caution began dreaming of becoming warriors, not in their own style, but in the human way, reckless, defiant, unyielding. The council's worst nightmare had come true. Humanity was no longer just a species. It was an idea. And ideas cannot be banned. Desperate, the council tried one final tactic. They declared humanity outlawed in every civilized system. No human ship could dock in council-controlled space. No human could buy or sell goods. Any alien caught aiding them faced imprisonment. It was the most sweeping sanction in galactic history. But even then, it failed, because banning something only makes it more desirable. Suddenly, smugglers wanted human weapons. Black markets paid fortunes for human art, human music, human stories recorded on cracked data pads. Soldiers secretly carved human symbols onto their armor, a sign of rebellion against the council's control. Even council officials, behind closed doors, admitted what they could not in public. Humans had become a force too deeply woven into the galaxy to remove. And yet, with every ban, every sanction, every punishment. Humanity's reputation grew darker. The galaxy began to see them not just as survivors, but as rebels. Not just as fighters, but as monsters who smiled at death. One phrase, spread on pirate broadcasts and whispered in prison cells, summed it up best: humans don't fear death, death fears humans. The irony was cruel. The Council had tried to paint humanity as dangerous, and in doing so, they convinced the galaxy it was true dot, and now entire empires were trembling at the consequences. The K-Rel Dominion, proud and ancient, sent an entire fleet to crush a single human colony on the edge of their space. They expected a quick victory. Instead, they fought for months, bleeding resources, their soldiers haunted by guerrilla attacks and traps that seemed to come from nowhere. The humans there did not win. They could not, but they did not lose either. When the K-Rel finally burned the colony to ash, half their fleet was gone, their soldiers broken, their empire humiliated. Other species watched closely. If the mighty K-Rel could not crush a single colony, what chance did anyone else have against humanity as a whole? Even more unsettling were the stories of humans choosing death on their own terms. Ships that refused to surrender and detonated their reactors, taking entire enemy fleets with them. Soldiers who stood their ground long enough for others to escape, laughing even as they were overwhelmed. And most terrifying of all, humans who survived things no one else could. Fire, radiation, starvation, wounds that should have killed them long ago. But alien generals began asking the same question in hushed tones. How do you fight an enemy who does not fear dying? The truth was, you did not. You endured them. You avoided them. And if you were smart, you prayed they never turned their full attention toward you. But what the galaxy did not yet understand was that humanity's power was never in its weapons, or even its soldiers. It was in its spirit, its refusal to bow, to surrender, to break. It was in the madness that made them laugh in the face of the impossible, because humans, more than any other species, had lived close to death since the beginning. On a world of predators, storms, and fragile bodies, they had survived by becoming something no other species dared to be: stubborn, reckless, and united in chaos. And now, that chaos was spreading through the stars. The council chambers grew quieter with each passing year. Where once leaders shouted about extermination, now they sat in silence, staring at one another, unwilling to speak the truth that hovered in the air. The bans had failed. The propaganda had failed. The sabotage had failed. Humanity could not be erased. And in the silence, one question began to rise, a question no one dared put into words, because even asking it felt like betrayal. What if humanity is not the threat we should fear, but the future we must embrace? It was unthinkable. It was heresy. And yet, more and more leaders found themselves thinking it. If humanity's chaos could not be contained, perhaps it could be guided, perhaps even joined, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The galaxy already saw humans as monsters, as demons who could not be broken, as legends too dangerous to deny. And once that belief had taken root, it could never be undone. The Council had feared humans for what they were. But now, the galaxy feared them for what they had become: symbols. And symbols cannot be destroyed, because in the end, humanity did not need to conquer the galaxy. The galaxy conquered itself with fear.